Hello and welcome to This Week in Oklahoma Politics. I'm your host, KOSU's Michael Cross, along with ACLU Oklahoma Executive Director Ryan Kiesel and Republican political consultant Neva Hill. Well, earlier this week, the Tulsa World wrote that State Superintendent Janet Barresi is requesting all communication between her Republican opponent, Joy Hoffmeister, and Jenks Schools, where her kids attended and where she had served as a member of the school board. Ryan, what were your thoughts when you heard this?
I think it's a perfectly legitimate request for documents under the Open Records Act. I think that transparency is the name of the game. Politically, however, it'll be interesting to see whether there will be any fallback or fallout from the request itself, because I don't know that the Barresi campaign has anything in particular they're looking for. I know that there are over 3,000 emails that they're going to be pouring over. It does look a little desperate at this point. Whenever you're politically, it looks desperate. Legally, I think that it's totally legit, and frankly, I encourage not just campaigns but individuals to look at the Open Records Act as a way to get information about their government. Now,
Neva, as a disclaimer, Janet Barresi is a client of yours, but still, your thoughts on when this news came out, what was going on?
Well, first of all, I mean, this is a request that took place back in January, and as Ryan said, this is a fairly routine order of business in a political campaign, certainly statewide or major races, where you take a hard look at the opponents, you try to find out as much op research as possible, and obviously if someone has been involved and is running for a state school superintendent position, they've been involved in their own school district in official capacities, foundation or otherwise, it would be routine and very customary to try to find out as much information as possible, and that's why there is a process and a procedure to go about it. I think it's interesting that the school district seems to have the biggest heartburn in trying to have the time to put this information together, but let's also remember that it is anyone that makes that type of request is responsible for paying for those documents if, in fact, they choose to do something other than just review them on site. So I think it's much to do about nothing. I don't think it's a case of anything being desperate or anything being out of the ordinary. I think it's just a matter of everybody on both sides kind of doing the volleying back and forth on, who's doing what and why.
Yeah, this is pretty standard playbook stuff here.
Absolutely.
Now, I will say just kudos to the Jenks Public School folks, because they are responding to this in a very fast manner. And we've talked about it on this program. The ACLU has had some issues where state agencies and state officials haven't responded all that fast. Yeah, Governor Fallin. So kudos to them for their quick response on this. Yeah.
Well, and what I do wonder is if she's using her capacity as state superintendent, though, isn't there a conflict of interest there?
Well, this was made through the campaign itself, and not as a state official. So the open records are they're open to anyone, whether you're a state official or not.
And frankly, I think what we would find is if we went and asked every single campaign running across the state right now in some fashion, we would probably find that similar requests have gone out, whether it's to a municipal government office, whether it's to something related to state government or in this case a school system. It's very common.
Yeah, and I think for political operatives, folks that have been on the inside, we see this and it's routine. I think the only real question out there is what's the public's perception of it? Does the public pick up the paper and see this and say, boy, this is really something that she shouldn't be doing. I don't know. I think
it's no different than if you have a situation where someone is a lawmaker. They have voted on hundreds or thousands, whatever the case may be, of pieces of legislation. Then obviously part of the op research, if you were on the opposite side, would be to take a very hard look at each of those pieces of legislation, see if there's anything behind them, see if there's anything that doesn't pass the smell test, see if there's anything that politically you can think that you can make a contrast on in terms of issues or positions. So, again, the public doesn't pay much attention to it, but the public would also be somewhat dismayed, I think, if there were things out there that weren't brought to light until after an election. Sure. And sometimes that's the case.
Governor Fallin's plan to provide storm shelters for schools passed the House last week, but the very next day, her office released information that, if passed by voters, could result in property tax increases. Now, some as much as like $60 a year for a $100,000 home. in places like Alva. Neva, could a tax increase be a deal breaker for the Republicans in the Senate?
I don't know that it's going to be a deal breaker. I mean, that remains to be seen. But really what we're talking about is, again, folks at the local level being able to make this decision. What this bill really allows is it creates a pathway so that these local schools that already are at capacity in terms of their bonding to be able to have one opportunity to be able to come back and say, okay, to the community, we want to do storm shelters. This is going to be the cost, and this is what the burden, or this is what the additional factor is going to be on each and every each and every homeowner in that community. And I think that's a straight up way to do it. And we'll see. It's not a blanket across the board. We're going to spend, hundreds of millions of dollars or $1 billion or whatever the price tag is, and all of those figures out there that the state doesn't have, but it allows the school districts individually to deal with this issue.
A few years ago, a tax cut it came out that it would, a small percentage, like 2 or 3%, would actually see a tax increase.
Right.
And it completely killed the tax cut. Do you think something like this might happen?
You talk about going through legislators' voting records and finding something to use against them in campaigns. This vote right here could very easily justify the campaign mailer that goes out against an incumbent that votes for this, saying they voted to raise taxes. And we've seen incumbents have been very reluctant to put their names next to anything that could put them in that position. I continue to be puzzled over the governor's insistence on this plan over the plan put forth by the Shelter Oklahoma organization and the Democratic candidate for governor, Joe Dorman. There you've got a plan that doesn't raise taxes at all and would provide an incentive for faster, making it faster for people to begin the construction of these storm shelters. With this plan, under Governor Fallin's plan, you have a potential for tax increases. I think not just a potential at this point, that if it goes forward and a school district decides to take on extra debt through a bond, that it would increase property taxes in that area. But you've got a couple of layers. Not only does this have to pass the House, but if a school district wants to exercise this new authority under this law, they'd have to go to a vote of the people, and it'd have to pass by 60% of the vote. So we're looking at a couple of steps between school districts being able to begin construction on these storm shelters.
But no different if a school wants to have a bond issue to build a new gymnasium, build a new elementary school, whatever it happens to be. I mean, there's not that much difference. It's still the individual school districts having to make this decision, and this is their way to fund those particular projects. So I think actually what the governor and the lawmakers that have been pushing this particular piece of legislation are saying is, let's bring it back to the local level. That's not a hard sell, and I think even for folks that vote that way, there's a flip side. I mean, yes, someone can say you raise taxes, but with every statement like that, there's an opportunity to fill in the blanks. And I think in this instance, if the public really wants and really feels strongly in a particular community that they have to have these storm shelters, there's a provision to get that done.
It's going to be interesting when the emails on this come out. There's an open records request that the governor's office is currently fighting. It's going to be interesting to see what their internal deliberations were over why they decided to move forward with this plan and rejected
the Take Shelter Oklahoma.
The Take Shelter Representative Dorman's plan, the proposed initiative petition. I don't disagree that there are some local issues there, but even under the plan put forward by the Take Shelter Oklahoma organization, it would still be up to the local school boards as to whether or not they wanted to draw down any of that money and use it for storm shelter construction.
A shortage of lethal injection drugs leads to the postponement of a couple of executions in the state of Oklahoma. Ryan, is this going to be an ongoing problem?
Absolutely it will be, and we're continuing to see the supply of lethal injection drugs dry up, not just in Oklahoma, but around the country. I think that, and we've even seen some emails that have come out recently that state officials in Oklahoma communicating with their counterparts in Texas made some reprehensible comments, joking about trading execution drugs for OU Texas tickets, and whether or not we could get Texas to throw the game or something like. I mean, just really, I think that it underscores how the most awesome power that the government can exercise isn't being treated with the solemnity that it ought to be, even assuming that we should have that. For me, if we look at what the government can do to you, the greatest power that the government can exercise over you is to strap you down to a gurney and put a needle in your arm and pump you full of drugs until you're dead. We have so many people, politicians on both sides of the aisle, that are criticizing the government for implementing the Affordable Care Act and criticisms there. But with regard to executing people, taking their lives, we're doing this in a shroud of secrecy.
Neva, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's look at the rest of the story on these two in question that are up for execution in Oklahoma this month. First of all, I mean, you've got one that was convicted of murdering a 19-year-old woman who was raped, shot, and buried alive during that whole episode that night in 1999, and the other is on death row awaiting execution for the murder and rape of his girlfriend's 11-month-old daughter in 1997. So, I mean, we talk about what's humane, we talk about all of these issues, but these are two men sitting on death row that have a process that has taken place over an extended period of time, and now it's being really kind of obfuscated by this postponement based on this debate back and forth on whether or not they can get the prescribed drugs to be able to actually ensue with the executions. So
yeah, I don't disagree. The crimes that they were convicted of are incredibly heinous crimes, and I think that they're disturbing to anyone that hears those facts. But regardless of where you stand on capital punishment, whether you're in favor of it or you're opposed to it, like myself, I think that at the very least, our government, the exercise of its ultimate power over its people, that exercise of power should not be conducted under secrecy, and that's exactly what we have right now. We know more about the government's ability, and just with open records request, we're looking at a state superintendent candidate's records of communication with the public school district. We're having, the state superintendent has an easier access to that than we do to information about the taking of an individual's life by the state.
Now, let me throw this one out to you, because this just came down the wire as we're recording this. Breaking news, Fred Phelps Sr., founder of the Westboro Baptist Church, who they protest at funerals, has died. What are your thoughts on Fred Phelps and Westboro Baptist Church as he is his passing?
I think that when we think about it from a free speech perspective, when we look at some of the most reprehensible and disturbing speech, what it does is it puts to the test, what we're willing to tolerate in the exercise of free speech. So, as awful as their actions are in my mind and my conscience, I do think that it helps us clarify, what the exercise of free speech really is.
Neva?
And I think it is one of those very difficult decisions. I think when you look at it, it is that delicate balance of preserving constitutional freedoms, but really with the backdrop of some of what's gone on with this particular group at funerals of fallen servicemen and women. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very, very difficult, and I think by and large most Oklahomans have a very difficult time watching what's gone on with this particular group.
Absolutely.
Sorry to throw that out to you, but I just wanted to get your opinion on that. Yeah. Ryan and Neva's comments do not necessarily reflect the views of the ACLU, KOSU, its